World of Warcraft Rise of the Horde by Christy Golden. Chapter 10. I've never been so proud of my father as when Drekthar told me of this incident. I have good cause to know how hard it is to make the right decisions at times. He had much to lose and nothing to gain by making the choices he did. No, that's not right. He retained his honor, and there could be no price high enough to sacrifice that. The letter broke no disagreement. Drotan stared at it, and then with a deep sigh passed it to his mate. Draka read it quickly, her eyes darting over the words, and growled soft and low in her throat. Nazul is a coward to lay this at your feet, she said softly, so as not to be overheard by the courier who waited outside. The request comes to him, not to you. I have promised to obey, Durotan said, his voice equally soft. Ner'zhul speaks for the ancestors. Draka cocked her head thoughtfully. A stray beam of sunlight penetrating the tent from the gap in the seams caught her face, throwing her strong jaw and high cheekbones into sharp relief. Durotan's breath caught in his throat as he looked at his beloved. For all the chaos, madness even, that seemed to have suddenly descended upon himself and his people, he was grateful for her. He touched her brown face lightly, with a sharp clawed finger, and she smiled briefly. My mate, I do not know that I trust Ner'zhul, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. But we both trust Drekthar, and he has confirmed what Ner'zhul has said. The Draenei have been plotting against us. Ner'zhul says that Velen has even insisted on entering Oshugan. Again, the chieftain of the Frostwood clan regarded the letter. I am pleased that Ner'zhul has not asked me to slay Velen. Perhaps once we have him in our power, we can convince him to change his ways. Have him explain why they are so bent on harming us. Perhaps we can negotiate peace. The thought seized his heart and squeezed it hard. As glorious as life with Draka was, as proud as he was of his clan, how much happier would he be simply doing as his father had done? Hunting the beasts of the woods and fields, dancing in the moonlight at the Koshgra festivals, listening to old tales and basking in the loving warmth of the ancestors. He had not said anything to Dreka, but he was secretly glad that they had not yet conceived a child. This was not a time that was easy on young orcs. Their childhood had been stolen from them. Adult duties had been placed on shoulders still not quite broad enough to bear them. If Draka were to bear a child, Durotan would not hesitate to have his son or daughter trained as other children were. He would ask nothing of other parents that he would not do himself. But he was glad that he was not faced with that decision quite yet. Draka watched him with intense, narrowed eyes. It was as if she could read his thoughts. You have met Velen before, she said. I watched you try to reconsolidate your memories of that encounter, with the news that they were trying to destroy us all. It was not easy for you. Nor is it now, he replied. Perhaps it is just as well that I am assigned this task. Velen will remember that night. Of that I am certain. He may be willing to treat with me, whereas he might not be willing to treat with Ner'zhul. I wish I had seen the letter he had sent. Draka sighed, got to her feet. I think that would have been most enlightening, she said. Durotan emulated her. I will tell the courier that his master may rest content. I will not shrink from my duty. He felt her worried gaze borne to his back as he left. Velen held the violet crystal close to his heart. The red and yellow ones rested at his side as he sat in meditation, casting a soft glow on his alabaster skin. The 4 others were placed everywhere elsewhere in Draenei territory, the great power serving his people as needed. But the violet one never left him. Its power opened the mind and spirit, and in a way, it was almost like being in direct communication with the Naru. Velen always felt stronger, cleaner. His soul honed to a keen edge when he meditated with the violet crystal. Although each of the 7 crystals was precious and powerful, this was the one he treasured the most. He strained to hear the soft whispers of cure, but he could not. Velen's heart ached. He bowed his head. He heard voices and opened his eyes. Brestalon was speaking to one of the acolytes, and Velen waved him forward. "What news, my old friend?" Velen inquired. He indicated a pot of hot herbal tea. Brestalon waved his hand, declining the offer. "Good and bad, my prophet," he said. "I deeply regret to inform you that the courier you sent to the shaman leader Nazul was killed by a group of orcs." Velen closed his eyes. The violet crystal grew warmer for a moment, as if trying to offer comfort. "I sensed his death," Velen said heavily, "but I hope it was an accident." "You are certain he was murdered?" "Nazul says so, and offers no apology." Restalon's voice conveyed his anger and affront at the incident. He was kneeling beside Velen next to the red crystal. Velen's dark blue eyes darted to the crystal as it pulsed once, briefly responding to Restalon's emotions. "So much for your theory that they would not attack an unarmed man," Restalon continued bitterly. "I had hoped for better," Velen said quietly. "But you said there was some good news to mitigate these sad tidings?" Restalon grimaced, if you can call it that. "Nazul said that an orc contingency will meet with us at the base of the mountain." He is not coming?" Restalon dropped his gaze and shook his head. "No, my prophet," he said quietly. "Who does he send in his stead?" "The letter did not say." "Give it to me." Velen stretched out a white hand, and Restalon placed the parchment in his palm. Velen uncurled the parchment and read the letter quickly. "Your courier is dead. It is fortunate that those who slew him thought to search the body for his missive. I have read it, and I will agree to send a contingency of orcs to speak with you. I guarantee nothing, not your safety, not a truce, nothing. But we will hear you out." Velen sighed deeply. This was not the response his soul had longed for. What had happened to the orcs? Why in this world or any other were they suddenly so bent on harming the Draenei, who had never opposed them in any fashion? "I guarantee nothing," Ner'zhul had said, writing in a strong, bold hand. "Very well," he said quietly. Velen said quietly. "Then nothing is guaranteed." He smiled at Restalon. "Rather like life." The day was inappropriately bright and cheerful, Duratan thought, squinting against the bright, early summer light that danced down. Surely on a day when his soul felt so bleak and unhappy, the weather ought to reflect it. Clouds, at the very least, more appropriately, a cold, drizzling rain. But the sun did not care about an orc's heavy heart, or even the fate of an entire race of people. It shone down as merely as if it was right every place. It shone down as merely as if all was right every place its rays touched. Oshugan almost seemed to be on fire, so bright was the light that reflected off its magnificent crystalline surface. Durotan had chosen a position of strength. From where he had positioned his warriors, he would be able to see Velen's traveling party long before they spotted the orcs. He had decided to wait and let the prophet of the Draenei come directly to him. Although he had strategically positioned his warriors so that if the Draenei attempt to flee, no avenue of flight would be open to them, and all the orcs who waited patiently on this offensively glorious day were armed to the teeth with shaman at the ready. With her sharp eyes and superb fighting skills, Draco was highly useful to him as a scout. He had positioned her as one of the lookouts in the first group of warriors. The instant that Velen was visible, she would send word to her mate via spell cast by Drekthar. Drekthar himself, though, was standing beside Durotan. As the most powerful shaman in the clan, his place was to protect the clan's leader. The two stood on a rock outcropping just above the entrance to the gleaming sacred mountain. Dozens of warriors waited with arrows, hand axes, and javelins at the ready. Others had spent days maneuvering large boulders in position. At a word from Durotan, a simple movement would send death in the form of huge stone crashing upon the Draenei. The threat of death, in fact, was everywhere on this lovely mountain on this beautiful sunny day. A breeze stirred Durotan's back hair, and a bird sang brightly. Drekthar looked at his chieftain with concern. "My chieftain, you are doing what you have been told to do," Drexar said earnestly. "These beings are our enemies." Durotan nodded and wished he could believe it as easily as every other orc seemed to. The breeze brushed his cheek again, more intensity, and this time he heard words on the wind. Draka's message, borne to him by Drekthar's bond with the elements. "They are coming, 5 of them. None of them are wearing armor or carry any visible weapons. They walk serenely." The wind wafted her words away, and he knew it went to touch the ears of all the orcs assembled. When the time was right, Drekthar would harness the wind to give orders to Durotan's troops. Durotan straightened, and his heart beat more swiftly. His hand gripped his battle axe tightly. "There they are," said Drekthar grimmingly. Durotan followed his gaze. Draka's report had been accurate, right down to her interpretation of the manner in which the Draenei approached. The 5 Draenei did not wear the strange blue silvery armor that Durotan remembered from his single encounter with them. They were dressed, instead, as if they had been for a meal, in robes of beautiful hues that caught the breeze and fluttered behind them like banners. Walking at the very front of the little group was the prophet Velen himself. He was unmistakable. His simple tan robes contrast with those of his entourage, and of course his strange white skin was unique. Durotan grinned a little despite the direness of the situation. The Draenei were so garishly clad that only a blind orc would have failed to spot them from a great distance. The smile faded at what that had to represent. They wanted to be spotted immediately. They wanted the orcs to be confident that they carried no weapon and were on what Mother Kusha would have believed called a pilgrimage. Or was it all just an elaborate trick? Shaman needed no spirits to destroy. Neither did the Draenei. Durotan remembered the magical nets that seared the blackened flesh on contact. Nets of energy alien to the orcs that had come from nowhere. No, even unarmed, the Draenei were far from harmless. He had briefed his warriors and knew they would obey. They understood they were not to fire a warning shot, not to utter even an insult without Durotan's express command. But they knew how the Draenei fought, and would not be taken unawares. Durotan could smell the tension emanating from these warriors closest to him. He wondered if the Draenei could too. Durotan watched as the groups he had set furthest away came out of hiding to close ranks behind the Draenei. They were far enough back so that Durotan hoped the Draenei would not notice. If they did, They gave no sign, but merely continued with a steady, confidence, serene pace. Durotan and Drekthar made no attempt to disguise themselves. After several long minutes, Velen lifted his head and looked up right into Durotan's eyes. Durotan did not break the gaze, but stood waiting for his enemies to continue their approach. They reached the base of the mountain. Before they could continue further, dozens of orcs moved purposely out of the hiding to surround them. Velen did not look the least bit surprised. He glanced around, smiled a little, and then returned his gaze to Durotan. Slowly, Durotan descended until he stood face to face with the Draenei prophet. Long has it been since you and I stood so, Long has it been since you and I stood so, Velen, Durotan said in a calm voice. He deliberately did not use the Draenei's title. Long indeed, Durotan, son of Gorad, chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, Velen said in that rich, smooth voice that Durotan remembered. Are you friends with Ogrim still? Indeed I am, Durotan replied. He carries the Doomhammer now, and is second in his own clan. Sorrow flittered across the pale face, a sorrow that was deep and unquestionably genuine. Again, Durotan remembered that night so long ago when this being had sat with him and talked of orcish ways, of the Doomhammer, and the cost at which Orgrim would buy it. I hope his father and yours passed with great honor, Velen said. We're not here today to speak of the past, Durotan said more forcefully than he intended. He did not like to remember that night. We are here because you have informed us that you dare trespass in our most sacred place. There it is, then, he thought. Let us not mince words. Velen held Durotan's gaze and nodded. I'd sent a missive to Ner'zhul, not to you, Durotan. He has declined to meet with me. I wonder, did he share this missive with you? There is no need for me to read it, Durotan replied. I was asked to come in his stead, and I have done so. Durotan saw the broad shoulders slump a little. Velen sighed deeply. I see, he said. He may not have told you why I wish to come today. I do not need to know your purpose, Draenei, Durotan said. But you do, or else this conversation would be for nothing. The voice was clear and crisp, and there was nothing old or frail about it, despite Velen's obvious ancient age. Durotan raised an eyebrow. That Velen was a wise elder was immediately apparent, but now, for the first time, Durotan caught a glimpse of the sheer strength of will that buoyed Velen for countless years. This mountain is sacred to your people. We know this, and we have respected it. But it is also sacred to us. Velen took a step forward, his gaze locked on Durotan's. The orc warriors around him shifted, murmuring, but otherwise did not move. Deep inside the mountain is a being that has long cared for the Draenei people, Velen continued. It is older by far than any either of our minds could grasp, and more powerful. But even old and powerful things can die, and it is dying now. There is wisdom and grace and reconciliation we can have from it. Your people and mine, we... Blasphemer! Durotan started. The bitter cry had sprung from the throat not of some short-tempered warrior in the crowd, but from the orc who stood beside him. Drekthar's eyes were wide and his body trembled with outrage. Veins stood out on his neck, and he shook his fist at Velen. Durotan was so shocked by the outburst that he did not silence it as quickly as he should have, and Drekthar continued. Oshagon belongs to us. It is the home of our beloved dead, cradler of their spirits, and your hideous cloven feet are not fit to take one step of its blessed sides. Velen too seemed surprised at the outburst. He turned his attention to the shaman and stretched out a hand imploringly. Your spirits are housed within these walls, it is true. And I would never say it was not so, Velen cried. But they are drawn there because of this being. It seeks to... It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Drekthar bellowed in outrage. Other cries went up, and before Durotan realized quite what was happening, he saw his warriors surge forward. Dreka moved towards them, trying to stop the attack, but she might as well have been trying to hold back the incoming tide. Durotan sprang and struck Drekthar hard across the face. The shaman whirled, snarling. Protect them! He cried. You will obey my orders, and you must take them alive. Protect them, curse you! Drekthar's eyes flashed in fury, but only for an instant. He lifted his hands and closed his eyes, and suddenly a huge circle of flame sprang around the 5 Draenei. A wind sprang up, whipping the fire even higher, and physically buffeting the orcs. The warriors stepped back, and to Durdan's horror, some of the archers began knocking arrows on their bowstrings. Hold! Bellowed Durotan, the one taking his order and bearing it to the warrior's ears. I will slay anyone who fires! Between his command and Drekthar's powerful, if reluctant, abilities, the Draenei were unharmed. Durotan raced down the mountain to his prisoners, for such they were now. Drekthar at his heels. Dismiss fire, Durotan told Drekthar. At once the sheets of flame that almost singed Durotan's eyebrows dissipated. He stood face to face now with Velen, and a wave of emotion he could not properly name rose inside him as he realized that the Draenei Elder was still as calm and serene as he had been when they had been simply talking. Velen, you and your people are now prisoner of the Frostwolf clan, Durotan said in a soft, dangerous voice. Velen smiled, sweetly, sadly. I expect nothing less. He and the other 4 somehow maintained their composure while Durotan ordered them stripped and searched. The glorious war robes were taken and given to Durotan's top warriors. And the Draenei were now clad in sweet, stiff tunics. His stomach turned at the jeers, insults, and spits that came their way at the humiliation. But he did not stop it. As long as no physical harm came to the prisoners, and Durotan watched closely to ensure that none would, he would let his warriors have their sport. Beside him, Draka looked angry at the behavior of her fellow Frostwolf and whispered, My mate, you cannot silence them. He shook his head. I want to see how the Draenei react. And the warriors have stayed their hands when they might have expected to kill. I will not silence their tongues as well. Draka looked at him searchingly and then nodded and withdrew. He knew she did not approve, and he did not like what he was seeing either. But he was walking a delicate line, and he knew it. My chieftain! Cried Rokor, Durotan's second in command. Come see what they have brought us! Durotan went to Rokhar's side and peered into the sack he had opened. His eyes widened. Nestled inside, swathed in soft fabric, were 2 exquisite, beautiful stones. One was red, and the other was yellow. Durotan ached to touch them, but did not. He looked up and met Velen's gaze. Long ago, Ruslan showed us a crystal similar to this one, he said. One that protected a city. What do these do? Each has its own strength. They are part of our legacy. They were bequeathed to us by the being that dwells in the sacred mountain. Durotan growled softly. You would do well not to mention that again, he said. To Rokhar, he said, Feed them, bind their hands, and put them on wolves, with shaman to guard them. Give the stones to Drekthar, and we will take the Draenei back with us to deliver them to Ner'zhul. He should have been here in my stead today. He turned and stalked off, not wanting to look at Velen's odd, glowing blue eyes, not wanting to see the disapproval in Dreka's. During the long ride back, Durtan wrestled with his emotions. On the one hand, he shared Drekthar's offense. Oshigan was sacred to the orcs. The idea that something other than the ancestors dwelt inside it, indeed, as Velen claimed, was so powerful that it lured the ancestors to it, struck him to the core. He could only imagine how the shaman felt about such a declaration. Everything seemed to point to Ner'zhul being correct, that the Draenei were a blight upon the world and should be eliminated. What nagged at him was why. He would get an answer to that question tonight. With everyone, including the 5 captives mounted, they made good time. The sun was only starting to set when they returned. Durtan had sent outriders ahead with good news, and the clan was waiting eagerly for their arrival. On his right was Drekthar and Rokar, who shared the sentiments of the Frostwolves. On his left was Dreka, who had been uncharacteristically silent throughout the entire event. Durtan knew that he did not want to hear what she had to say. He was already being pulled in too many directions as it was. The prisoners were ungraciously shoved into 2 tents, and an immediate guard was set around them. 4 seasoned warriors and Drekthar's most trusted shaman stood proudly, pleased with the duty entrusted to them. Durtan had ordered Velen be isolated. He wanted to speak with the Draenei prophet alone. After the excitement had settled down somewhat, Durtan took a deep breath. He was not looking forward to this conversation, but it had to be done. He nodded to the guards and entered the small tent that hosted Prophet Velen. Since he had ordered Velen bound, he expected to see the elder with his hands tied. Instead, he saw that whoever had carried out this order had done so with excessive zeal. The tent had been erected around a sturdy tree, and Velen was now bound to the trunk. His arms had been yanked back at an awkward angle, and the ropes around white flesh of his wrists tied so tightly that even the dim light of the twilight, Durtan could see that they were turning a darker shade. A rope tied, thankfully loose, around his neck forced him to keep his head up or risk choking. A dirty cloth had been shoved in his mouth. He was on his knees, and his hooves, too, were bound behind him. Durtan uttered a deep oath and drew a dagger. Velen gazed at him with no sign of fear in those deep blue eyes, but Durtan did not notice that the Draenei looked surprised when the orc used the weapon to cut the bonds rather than his throat. Velen made no sound, but a flicker of pain passed over his ghostly white face as blood returned to his limbs. I told them to bind you, not truss you up like a towelbuck, Durtan murmured. Your people are very eager, it would seem. Durtan passed the elder a water skin and watched him closely while he drank. Sitting before him in filthy clothing, gulping at tepid water, his white flesh raw from the bonds, Velen did not look like much of a threat. How would he feel, he wondered, if he had gotten word of the Draenei treating Mother Keshrir so? Everything about this felt wrong, yet Mother Keshrir himself had assured Drekthar that the Draenei were a threat so dire as to be almost unimaginable. There was a bowl of cold blood porridge on the ground. With his right foot, Durtan shoved it toward the prisoner. Velen eyed it, but did not eat. Not quite the feast you served Orgrim and me when we dined in Telmore, Durtan said. But it is nourishing. Velen's lips curved in a smile. It was a memorable evening. Did you get what you wanted from us that night? Durtan demanded. He was angry, but not with Velen. He was angry that it had come to this. The one who had shown him nothing but courtesy was now his captive, and so he took it out on the prophet. I do not understand. We merely wish to be good hosts to adventuresome boys. Duratan got to his feet and kicked over the bowl. Congealed porridge oozed onto the earth. Do you expect me to believe this? Velen did not rise to the bait. He replied calmly, It is the truth. It is your choice on whether you believe it. Duratan dropped to his knees and shoved his face into Velen's. Why are you trying to destroy us? What have we ever done to you? I might ask you the same question, said Velen. A flush had come to his white face. We have never lifted a finger to harm you, and now over 24 Draenei are dead from your attacks. The truth of the comment made Duratan even angrier. The ancestors do not lie to us, he snarled. We have been warned that you are not what you would seem, that you are our enemies. Why did you bring those crystals, if not to attack us? We thought it might help us better communicate with the being in the mountain. Velen spoke quickly, as if trying to get the words out before Duratan could silence him. It is not an enemy to the orcs, nor are we. Duratan, you are intelligent and wise. I saw this in you that night so long ago. You are not the one to be blindly follow like an animal to slaughter. I do not know why your leaders lie to you, but they do. We have ever sought to interact peacefully with you. You are better than this, son of Gorad. You are not like the others. Duratan's dark brown eyes narrowed. You are wrong, Draenei, he spat. I am proud to be an orc. I embrace my heritage. Duratan looked exasperated. You misunderstand. I do not mean to malign your people. I merely... Merely what? Merely tell us that the only reason we are seeing our beloved dead is because of your god trapped in a mountain? It is not a god, it is an ally, and would be one to your people as well if you would permit it to be. Duratan swore and rose, stalking about the tent, his hands clenching and unclenching. Then he uttered a long, deep sigh, the anger in him burning down into ashes. Velen, your words are but wood on the fire of our wrath, he said quietly. Your claim is arrogant and offensive. It will not support those who are already prepared to slay your people on the word of our ancestors. I do not understand myself, but you are asking to choose between people I trust, traditions I have been raised on, and your word. He turned and faced the Draenei. I will choose my people. You need to know this. If you and I come face to face on the field of battle, I will not stay in my hand. Velen looked only curious. You will not take me to Nazul then? Duratan shook his head. No. If he wanted you, he should have come for you himself. He appointed me to treat with you, and I have carried out my duties as I saw fit. You were supposed to deliver a prisoner to him, Velen said. I was to meet with you and listen to your words, Duratan said. Had I captured you in battle, stricken a weapon from your hands, and rustled you to the earth, then yes, you would be a prisoner. But there is no honor in binding a foe who extends his hand willingly for the ropes. We are at an impasse, you and I. You insist that I have no ill will towards... You insist you have no ill will toward the orcs. My leaders and the ghosts of my ancestors tell me otherwise. Again, Duratan knelt before the Draenei. They call you prophet. Do you know the future, then? If so, tell me what you and I can do to avert what I fear will unfold. I would not shed innocent life, Velen. Give me something. Anything I can take to Ner'zhul that will prove that what you say is true. He realized he was pleading, but the fact did not distress him. He loved his wife, his clan, his people. He hated what he was seeing. An entire generation rushing headlong into adulthood with only blind hate in their hearts. If begging before the strange being could change this, then begging he would. The strange blue eyes held an unspeakable empathy. Velen extended a pale hand and placed it on Durotan's shoulder. The future is not like a book one can read, he said quietly. It is ever changing, like a rush of water or a swirl of sand. I am granted certain insights, but nothing more. I felt very strongly that I needed to come unarmed, and behold, I am greeted not by the Orcs' greatest shaman, but one who has slept safer under my roof. I do not think this an accident, Durotan, and if anything can be done to avert this, it lies with the Orcs, not with the Draenei. All I can do is tell you what I have already said. The river's course can be changed, but you are the ones who must change it. That is all I know, and I pray it is enough to save my people. The look on his ancient face, oddly cracked face, and the tone of his voice told Durotan that his words did not. That Velen did not indeed think it would be enough to save his people. Durotan closed his eyes for a moment and stepped back. We will keep the stones, he said. Whatever power they have, the shaman will learn to harness. Velen nodded, sadly. Such I assumed, he said, but I had to bring them. I had to trust we could find a way past all of this. Why was it, Durotan wondered, I felt closer at this moment to one he had been told was an enemy than to the spiritual leader of his own people? Draka might know. She had known all along. She had said nothing, understanding with a wisdom that could not comprehend that he had to come to this moment on his own. But he would speak to her tonight, alone in their tent. Get up, he said, speaking roughly to hide his emotions. You and your companions may leave safely. He grinned. Suddenly, as safely as you might in the darkness with no weapons. If you come to your deaths this night when you are past our territory, it will not be on my head. That would be convenient for you, agreed Velen, getting to his feet. But somehow I think it is not what you want. Durotan did not reply. He marched out of the tent and told the waiting guards, Velen and his 4 companions are to be safely escorted to the borders of our lands. Then they will be released, to return to their city. No harm is to befall them. Is that clear? The guard looked as if he was about to protest, but another, wiser warrior shot him a fierce glance. Very clear, my chieftain, the first guard muttered. As they went to fetch the other Draenei, Drekthar hurried up to Durotan. Durotan, what are you doing? Ner'zhul expects prisoners. Ner'zhul can take the prisoners himself, Durotan snarled. I was in command, and this is my decision. Do you question it? Drekthar looked around and walked Durotan away from prying eyes. I do, he hissed. You heard what he said. He claims the ancestors are like moths to a torch around this god of his. The arrogance. Ner'zhul's right. They must be eliminated. We have been told so. If it is to be, then it will be, said Durotan. But not this night, Drekthar. Not this night. As he and his companions walked slowly over the dew-drenched grasses of the meadows, past the towering black silhouettes of trees of Trichador Forest, toward the nearest city, Velen's heart was heavy. 2 of the Atma crystals were now in possession of the orcs. He had no doubt but that Durotan's words were correct, and that their shaman would shortly unlock their secrets. But they had missed one. They had missed it because it did not wish to be found, and when it came to the crystals, light obeyed its wishes and bent itself so the violet crystal remained hidden from view of searching orcs. He held it close to his heart now, feeling its warmth seep into his ancient flesh. He had gambled and failed. Not completely. That he and his friends were alive and walking towards safety was testimony to that. But he had hoped the orcs would listen. That they would at least accompany him into the heart of their own sacred mountain and behold something that did not negate their faith. Not in the slightest, but had in fact given birth to it. The outlook was grim. As he had walked into the camp, he had observed what was happening. Younglings were being trained so hard they were dropping from exhaustion. Foragers were going even so late at night, for all that he was walking freely now. Velen knew that the incidents of today had done nothing to avert what would come. The orcs, even the ones led by the insightful, slow-to-anger Durotan, were not just preparing for the possibility of war. They were convinced of the certainty of it. When the sun showed her yellow head tomorrow morning, she would look upon the inevitable. The crystal he held so close to his heart pulsed, sensing his thoughts. Velen turned to his companions and looked upon them sorrowfully. "The orcs will not be dissuaded from this path," he said, "and therefore if we are to survive, we too must walk the path of war." Far in the distance, broken, dying, resting as peacefully as possible deep below the waters of the sacred pool, the being known as Cure uttered a deep, agonizing cry. Velen started, recognizing the voice, and bowed his head. Frostwolf orcs gasped at the sound and turned to regard the perfect triangle of Orshgan. "The ancestors are angry with us," a young shaman cried. "Angry for letting Velen go." Durotan shook his head. He had to rebuke the youngster, and on the morrow, if such words were uttered again, he would. But now his heart was full of sorrow. It was not a cry of anger that came from the sacred mountain. It was the wrenching sound of ultimate grief, and he shuddered inside as he wondered why the ancestors mourned so very, very deeply. Chapter 11. Ner'zhul, Gul'dan. Two of the darkest names ever to sully the history of my people, and yet Drekthar tells me that once Ner'zhul was admired, even beloved, and truly cared for the people whose spiritual leader he was. It's hard to reconcile those words with what Ner'zhul has become, but I try. I try because I want to understand. And yet, try as I might, I do not. What? Ner'zhul's shriek of outrage made his apprentice Gul'dan wince. Durotan did not bat an eye. "I released the prophet Velen," the chieftain of the Frostwolf clan had said calmly. "Your orders were to take him and the others prisoner." Ner'zhul's voice climbed with each word. It had been so plain, so easy. What had Durotan been thinking? To toss away this opportunity like bones to the bones when the meat had been devoured. How much information they could have extracted from Velen. What kind of bargaining power over the Draenei would they have bought them? But the thought was dwarfed by the overwhelming horror of how Kil'jaeden would react. What would he do when he learned that Velen had not been captured? The beautiful being had been seemingly well pleased at the prospect when Ner'zhul told him of the plan, flushed with pride at his cleverness, thinking victory already assured. Ner'zhul had even dared to offer Velen to Kil'jaeden as a sort of present. Now what would happen? The realization that he felt fear rather than charging at bringing disappointing news was not lost on the shaman. "You put me in charge of the capture, and capture them I did," Durotan replied. "But there is no honor in a prisoner taken willingly. You want us to be strong as a people rather than as individual clans, and we cannot do that without a code of honor that is invaluable, that is." Durotan continued to speak in his gruff, deep voice. But Ner'zhul was no longer listening. At an instant that froze space and time, Ner'zhul had a sudden realization that Kill Jaden might not be the benevolent spirit he pretended to be. As Durotan, lost in his own voice, speaking words to explain his decision, did not notice the shaman's shift in attention. But Ner'zhul felt Gul'dan's gaze upon him, and another fear welled up inside him that Gul'dan was bearing witness to his master's first hints of doubt. What was the right thing to do? How can I best serve? Why is Rolkan no longer coming to me? He blinked and came back to himself when he realized that Durotan had ceased speaking. The large chieftain was regarding Ner'zhul intently, waiting for the shaman to speak. How best to handle this? Durotan was well regarded among the clans. If Ner'zhul punished Durotan for the decision, there would be many who would respond with sympathy to the Frostwood clan. It could cause a rift in the fabric Ner'zhul was trying to weave, the tightly knit fabric of a united Orc nation, a horde, if you will. On the other hand, if he condoned Durotan's actions, it would be a severe and insulting blow to those who had fervently supported his previous position that the Draenei must die. He could not decide. He stared at Durotan, who began to frown slightly. "My master is so overcome with rage that he cannot speak," came Gul'dan's smooth voice. Both Durotan and Ner'zhul turned to look at the younger shaman. "You have disobeyed a direct order from your spiritual leader. Return to your camp, Durotan, son of Garad. My master will send you a letter shortly conveying his decision." Durotan glanced back at Ner'zhul, his dislike of Gul'dan plain on his broad face. Ner'zhul gathered himself and stood tall, and this time, when he reached for words, he found them. "Begone, Durotan! You have displeased me, and worse, you have displeased the being who has shown us such a favor. You will hear from me soon enough." Durotan bowed, but did not leave immediately. "There is one thing I do bring you," he said. He extended a small bundle to Ner'zhul. Shaman accepted it with hands that shook, and hoped desperately that both Durotan and Gul'dan would interpret the trembling as fury and not fear. "We took these off the prisoners," Durotan continued. "A shaman believes they may hold power that we can use against the Draenei." He hesitated a moment longer, as if waiting for further word from Ner'zhul. When the silence stretched long and uncomfortably between them, he bowed again and left. For a long moment, neither master nor apprentice spoke. "My master, please forgive me for interrupting. I saw you were so overcome that you could not speak, and I fear that the Frostwood boy would misinterpret your anger for hesitancy." Ner'zhul shot him a searching look. The words sounded sincere. Gul'dan's face looked sincere, and yet there was once a time when Ner'zhul would have confessed his doubts to his apprentice. He had trusted and trained him for years, but now, at this moment, although battered by uncertainties as if by opposing winds, Ner'zhul knew one thing very clear. He did not want Gul'dan to see any weakness in him. "I was indeed overcome with rage," Ner'zhul lied. "Honor serves nothing if it hurts your people." He realized he was clutching the bundle Durotan had given him. Gul'dan was staring at it almost hungrily. "What did Durotan give you to offset your anger with him?" Gul'dan inquired. Ner'zhul looked at him with a superior air. "We'll examine it first, and share it with Kil'jaeden, apprentice," he said coolly. He was looking for a reaction, and dreaded seeing it. For the briefest of moments, anger flittered across Gul'dan's face. Then the younger orc bowed deeply and said courteously, "Of course, my master. It was arrogant of me to expect. I am merely curious. That is all. To see if the Frostwolf chieftain had contributed anything of worth." Ner'zhul softened somewhat. Gul'dan had served him well and loyally for many years now, and indeed would succeed Ner'zhul when the time came. He was jumping at shadows. "Of course," Ner'zhul said more gently. "I will let you know if I learn anything. After all, you are my apprentice, are you not?" Gul'dan brightened. "I serve you in all things, my master." Looking happier, bowed again and left Ner'zhul alone. Ner'zhul sat heavily on the skins that served him for a bed. He cradled the bundle in his lap and said a prayer to the ancestors that if Durotan had failed to deliver the leader of the Draenei, perhaps at least the Frostwolf chieftain had managed to obtain something of value. He took a deep breath, unwrapped the bundle, and gasped. Nestled against soft fur were two glowing gems. Gingerly, Ner'zhul touched the red one and gasped again. Energy, excitement, and a sense of power flooded through him. His hands wanted to grip a weapon, although he had no need for one. For years, he had yearned to swing it. Somehow he knew that if this crystal were on his person, his aim would be true. What a gift this was to the orcs! He would have to see how he could turn this hot red passion for fighting that lurked at the center of this stone to his purpose. It took great effort of will for him to release the red crystal. He breathed deeply, calming himself as his mind cleared. The yellow one next. Ner'zhul gasped again. This time he had some idea of what to expect. Again he felt an emanating warmth and a sensation of power, but this time there was no excitement or urgency. As he held the yellow crystal, his mind cleared, and he realized that he had hitherto been filled with words. He had hitherto seen things in a fog-dense valley. He could not find the words to describe it, but there was a purity, a clarity, a precision to everything. It was in fact so keen, so clear that Ner'zhul began to perceive this opening of his mind as pain. He dropped the crystal back into his lap. The brilliant clarity, knife-sharp, faded somewhat. Ner'zhul smiled. If he did not have Velen himself to present to Kil'jaeden, at least these precious items would offer to appease the magnificent being. Kil'jaeden was furious. Ner'zhul quakened before the anger, prostrating himself on the earth, murmuring, "Forgive me!" As Kil'jaeden's rage, he squeezed his eyes shut, anticipating pain such as he had never experienced, to suddenly start shooting all along his body when abruptly the rage ceased. Cautiously, Ner'zhul risked a glance at his benefactor. Kil'jaeden was once more looking serene, poised and calm, and bathed in radiance. "I am disappointed," the beautiful one murmured. He shifted his weight from one enormous cloven foot to the other. "But I know two things. The Frostwolf clan leader is the one responsible, and you will never, ever trust him with an important task again." Relief swept through Ner'zhul, and he almost fainted from the sensation. So powerful was it. "Of course not, my lord. Never again. And we did find these crystals for you." "They are of little use to me," said Kil'jaeden. Ner'zhul winced. "But I think your people might find them helpful in your battle to crush the Draenei." That is your battle, is it not? Fear again clenched hard at Ner'zhul's heart. Of course, my lord! It is the ancestors' will. Kil'jaeden looked at him for a moment, his brilliant eyes emanating flame. It is my will, he said simply, and Ner'zhul nodded frantically. Of course, it is your will, and I obey you in all things. Kil'jaeden seemed satisfied by the response and nodded. Then he was gone. Ner'zhul sank back, wiping his face, greasy with the sweat of terror. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of something white. Gul'dan had seen everything. We have been planning an attack for some time now. And last night, when the Pale Lady did not shine, we descended in force upon the sleepy little town. Not a one was left alive, not even the few children we found. Their supplies, food, armor, weapons, some strange items we know nothing of, and shun. This bounty is now shared between the two unified clans. Their blood, blue and thick, dries upon our faces, and we dance in celebration. There was more to the missive, but Ner'zhul did not read it. Did not have to. Although the details might be different, the essence of the letters was always the same. A successful attack, glory in the kill, the ecstasy of blood spilled. Ner'zhul glanced at the pile of letters he had received just that morning. 7 of them. With each month that passed, even throughout the long, hard winter months, the orcs grew more skilled at killing Draenei. They had learned much about their foe with each victory. The stones that Durotan had given Ner'zhul proved to be valuable indeed. Ner'zhul worked with them alone at first, and then in company of other shaman. The red stone they had dubbed Heart of Fury, and they found that when the leader of the raid carried it, not only did he fight with more energy and skill, but everyone under his command benefited as well. The stone was passed from clan to clan at each new moon, and was highly coveted. Yet Ner'zhul knew no one would dare steal it for himself. The second stone they called Brilliant Star. He had found that when a shaman carried the crystal, he or she experienced a profound focus and clarity. While the Heart of Fury roused emotions, the Brilliant Star calmed them. Thought process was swifter and more precise, and concentration was not easily broken. The result was powerful magic, precisely controlled, another key to an orcish victory. The delicious irony that they were using the Draenei's own magic against them further improved morale amongst the orcs. But all in these did not hearten Ner'zhul. A sudden flash of doubt that shuddered through him when he had spoken with Durotan had shaken him to the bone. He fought back the suspicions, terrified that somehow Kil'jaeden was able to read his thoughts. But they came, like maggots writhing from a corpse, to haunt his sleeping and waking thoughts. Kil'jaeden looked very, very similar to the Draenei. Was it possible that they were somehow the same? And he, Ner'zhul, had been used in some sort of civil war? One night he found he no longer could bear it. Silently he dressed, roused his wolf Skychaser, who stretched and blinked at him sleepily. Come, my friend, Ner'zhul said affectionately as he settled on the great creature's back. He had never been ridden to the sacred mountain. Always he had walked as was tradition, but he needed to return before he was missed, and he was certain that the urgency of his mission would mitigate his offense with the ancestors. It was almost spring, almost time for the Kushgaraf festival, but spring seemed so far away as the cold wind bit at Ner'zhul's ears and nose. He huddled down gratefully for the warmth of the massive wolf, and shielded himself as best he could from the winds and now snow. The wolf pressed on through the drifts, making steady if not swift progress. At last Ner'zhul looked up and saw the perfect triangle of the mountain spirits, and a great weight suddenly lifted from his heart. For the first time in months, he truly felt as if he was doing the right thing. Sky Chaser would have difficulty climbing, so with a command to stay, he settled down, burrowed into a drift, and curled up tightly. Ner'zhul did not imagine he would be more than a few hours, and hurried to climb the mountain with more accuracy than he had felt in a long time. His sack heavy with water skins, and his heart full of anticipation. He should have done this long ago. He should have gone right to the source of wisdom as shaman before him had done. He had no idea why he had never thought of this before. At last, he came to the entrance and paused before the perfect oval. As anxious as he was to reach the ancestors, he knew the ritual must be honored. He lit the bundle of dry grass he carried and let his sweet scent calm and purify his thoughts. Then he stepped forward, murmuring a spell to light the torches that lined the walk. Ner'zhul had walked this path more times than he could recall, and his feet moved steadily as if of their own accord. Down twinned the smooth paths, and Ner'zhul's heart raced with hope as he stepped forward into the darkness. It seemed to take longer than usual for him to become aware of the increase in light. Ner'zhul stepped into the cavern and thought that somehow the light emanating from the sacred pool seemed dimmer than it had in the past. The thought unsettled him. He took a deep breath and chilled himself. He was bringing his own external fears into the sacred space, nothing more. He stepped to the pool, removed the water skins from his pack, and poured out the contents. The soft splashing of water was the only sound, and it seemed to echo. His offering complete, Ner'zhul sat by the water's edge and waited, gazed into the radiant depths. But nothing happened. He did not panic. Sometimes the ancestors took their time about responding, but when more time had passed, unease began to stir in Ner'zhul's heart. Moved, he spoke aloud. "Ancestors! Beloved dead! I, Ner'zhul, shaman of the Shadow Moon clan, leader to your children, have come to seek, no, begging wisdom. I have lost my way to your light. The times are dark and fearful, even as we grow stronger, more united as a people. I question the path I am on, and beseech your guidance. Please, if ever you loved and cared for those who have followed in your footsteps, come to me now and advise me that I may lead them well." A voice quavered. He knew he sounded lost and pathetic, and for a moment stubborn pride made him flush with shame. But then that feeling was chased away by the knowledge that he did care for his people. He did want to do what was right for them, and at this moment he had no idea what that might be. The pool began to glow. Ner'zhul leaned forward eagerly, his eyes roaming the surface, and in the water he saw the face looking back at him. "Rokan!" he breathed. For a moment quick tears mercifully blurred her image. He blinked, and his heart lurched with pain as he saw the look in her ghostly eyes. It was hatred. Ner'zhul recoiled as if struck. Other faces began to appear in the water, dozens of them. All of them had the same expression. Nausea welled in him, and he cried out, "Please, help me! Grant me your wisdom that I may win favor again in your eyes." Rokan's severe features softened somewhat, and it was with a trace of compassion in her voice that she spoke. "There is nothing you can do. Not now. Not in 100 years to win favor in our eyes. You are not the savior of your people, but their betrayer." "No!" he shrieked. "No! Tell me what to do, and I will do it. It is not too late. Surely it is not too late." "You are not strong enough," said another rumbling voice, this one male. If you were, you would have never walked so far down this path. You would have not been so easily gullied in doing the will of one who bears no love for our people. But I do not understand, Ner'zhul murmured. Rokan, you came to me. I heard you. Greshnar, you advised me. Kil'jaeden was the one you wanted me to embrace. The great friend to all the orcs. She said nothing in response to this. She did not have to. Even as the words trembled from his lips, he understood now how profoundly he had been misled. The answers had never appeared to him at all. It had all been a trick concocted by Kil'jaeden, whoever, whatever he was. They were right not to trust Ner'zhul. No. Any shaman who could be so easily deceived could never be trusted to put things right again. All was an elaborate web of lies, deceit, and manipulation, and he, Ner'zhul, had been the first foolish insect to become extremely trapped in it. Nearly 100 Draenei were dead. There was no turning back, no requesting aid from the ancestors. He could not trust any of his visions ever again, except to understand that they were all likely to be lies. Worst of all, he had delivered his people into the hands of one who, despite his fair appearance and honeyed words, did not have their best interests in whatever passed for his heart. Even as he stared into the ghostly eyes of his beloved, she turned away from him. One by one, the myriad faces reflected in the water followed suit. Ner'zhul trembled with horror of what he had done. There was nothing he could do to make it right, nothing he could do except continue on the path that Kil'jaeden had so carefully contrived for him to walk, and pray to the ancestors who no longer listened to him, that somehow, some way, things would turn out all right. He buried his face in his hands and wept. Crouching in the darkness, in a bend in the tunnel, Gul'dan listened to the sounds of his master sobbing and smiled to himself. Kil'jaeden would be grateful for the information.